The sentence landed in the middle of the living room like a dropped plate. The final. No attempt to soften it. My parents were seated across from me on the couch, knees angled toward each other the way they always did when they'd already agreed on something. The room smelled like old upholstery and lemon polish. Afternoon light slanted in through the blinds, catching dust in the air and making everything look suspended. My name is Marina. I'm 32 years old. Your sister's family always comes first, my father said, voice steady, almost instructional. You're always last. He said it the way people say facts they believe are settled. My mother nodded once, lips pressed together. My sister smiled. Not wide. Just enough. The kind of smile that doesn't ask permission. I felt something go quiet inside me. Not anger. Not hurt. Recognition. Good to know, I said. The words surprised all of us. They surprised me most. My sister's smile faltered, just slightly, recalculating. My mother frowned, already preparing a follow-up, something about context or timing or how I shouldn't take things so personally. I didn't wait for it. I stood, picked up my coat and left. Outside, the air smelled like cut grass and hot pavement. A lawnmower hummed a few houses down. Ordinary sounds. I sat in my car for a minute with my hands on the wheel, breathing evenly, replaying the sentence in my head. Not to argue with it, just to place it where it belonged. Always last. There are moments when a lifetime of small confirmations finally condense into something clear. I thought about the checks I'd written quietly over the years. The emergencies that somehow found my phone first. The way my calendar had bent around other people's needs until I couldn't remember what my own plans looked like without negotiation. I went home and opened my laptop. The apartment smelled faintly of clean laundry and cold coffee. I pulled up my accounts, the ones I'd been meaning to organize properly for years. I separated things carefully. Methodically. Savings here. Bills there. A new folder with my name on it, not shared, not implied. The numbers didn't scare me. They steadied me. I made my own plans. Travel dates I'd postponed. A deposit for a class I'd talked myself out of because someone else might need help. A quiet, satisfying click each time something moved into place. I didn't announce any of it. I didn't make a speech. I just stopped orbiting. Weeks passed. Messages came and went. My sister sent photos, vacations, renovations, a new car. Always framed as updates, always carrying the assumption that I'd be happy to admire from the sidelines. I was. From a distance. Then the call came. It was late. The sky outside my window was already dark, the city softened by rain. My mother's name lit up my phone. Her voice when I answered was thin and urgent. She said there was a family emergency. She said it was serious. She said they needed help. She didn't say please at first. I listened. The details tumbled out. Medical bills, timing, the kind of crisis that rearranges priorities overnight. I pictured the living room again. The couch. The way my father's voice hadn't wavered. The smile that hadn't reached my sister's eyes. They expected me to pay. Of course they did. I told my mother I needed a moment. I hung up and stood by the window, watching rain streak down the glass, headlights smearing into lines of white and red. I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt prepared. Always Last had finally given me the one thing I'd been missing. Clarity. And whatever happened next would be built on that, not obligation. I didn't call back right away. I made tea and let it steep too long, the water turning darker and more bitter by the minute. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the window, a patient sound, like it knew how to wait without demanding anything in return. I stood there watching the city blur and sharpen again, thinking about how often urgency had been used to pull me back into place. When I did return the call, my mother answered on the first ring. Relief rushed into her voice so quickly it felt rehearsed. She filled the silence with updates I hadn't asked for. Doctor names, estimates, timelines. She said the word emergency again, as if repetition could turn expectation into agreement. My father took the phone. His tone shifted immediately. Calm. Practical. He explained what needed to be done and when. He didn't ask if I could help. He outlined amounts. He said it would be temporary. He said family shows up. I thought about the way he'd said always last. About how easily that sentence had passed his lips. About how long I'd been showing up without being counted. I told him I'd separated my finances. I told him I'd made other plans. I said it plainly without apology. The line went quiet for a beat too long. When he spoke again, his voice was sharper, disbelief edging into irritation. He said now wasn't the time for boundaries. He said this wasn't about old feelings. Old feelings. As if patterns age out on their own. My sister texted while I was still on the call. A long message that tried to sound warm but read like a reminder of everything I owed. She mentioned the kids. She mentioned stress. She said she knew I'd do the right thing. The smile from the living room floated back into my mind, intact and unbothered. I ended the call and sat down at the table, my phone buzzing beside me. The apartment smelled like wet pavement drifting in through a cracked window and the faint citrus of the cleaner I'd used earlier. I opened my laptop again, pulled up the folders I'd created weeks ago, and looked at the numbers without flinching. A memory drifted in, me at 27 covering a shortfall because it was easier than listening to the fallout. Me at 30 postponing something I wanted because someone else needed help right now. Each moment had been framed as temporary. None of them had been. I typed a message and erased it. Typed another. The words needed to be exact. I wasn't angry. I wasn't explaining my childhood. I wasn't asking for understanding. I was stating a limit. When I finally sent it, it was brief. I told them I couldn't cover the emergency. I told them I'd already committed my resources elsewhere. I offered to help in non-financial ways, calls, logistics, research, if that was useful. The response was immediate and explosive. My father accused me of abandoning the family. My mother cried. My sister said she couldn't believe I'd do this now. The messages stacked on top of each other, urgent and panicked, trying to overwhelm the space I'd just drawn. I put the phone face down and sat there, breathing evenly, listening to the rain and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. My hands didn't shake. My chest felt tight but steady. For the first time, their emergency didn't become my emergency by default. I knew the real shock hadn't landed yet. That would come when they realized I meant it. They didn't realize at first that the answer wasn't temporary. That this wasn't a pause or a tactic. The next day brought new messages, adjusted tones. My mother tried calm again, the way she does when emotion hasn't worked. She said she understood I had plans, but emergencies were different. She said this would all be remembered later, the way debts are remembered. My father sent a single line about responsibility. My sister sent nothing at all. Silence from her has always meant calculation. I went to work anyway. The office smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner, familiar and grounding. I answered emails, sat through meetings, nodded at the right moments. It struck me how functional I felt, how intact. For years I'd assumed saying no would fracture something essential in me. Instead it felt like setting a bone that had healed wrong. During lunch I scrolled through old bank statements on my phone. Transfers I'd forgotten. Notes I'd added to myself, temporary, helping out, they'll pay me back. The pattern was so clean it almost felt impersonal. Evidence without accusation. I closed the app and went for a walk, cold air biting at my cheeks, dry leaves scraping along the sidewalk. Another memory drifted in, uninvited. My parents sitting at the same kitchen table years ago, telling me my sister needed support because she had more responsibilities. A new baby. A new house. A new emergency. I'd nodded then, swallowing the question of when my turn would come. Always last had been practiced long before it was spoken aloud. By evening the pressure shifted again. My father called, not angry this time. Measured. He asked if I'd reconsidered. He said the situation had escalated. He said they were counting on me. I told him I hadn't reconsidered. I told him my plans were still my plans. There was a pause. Then he said something that finally exposed the center of it all. He said my sister's family couldn't manage this without me. I realized then that what they called an emergency was really a system failing without its quiet support. I said I was sorry they were struggling. I said I hoped they found a solution. I didn't offer one. When the call ended, my phone stayed still for a long time. The calm after impact. That night I cooked dinner slowly. Chopped vegetables. Let oil heat properly before adding anything. The kitchen filled with the smell of garlic and onions, grounding and present. I ate at the table, not scrolling, not waiting for a vibration. I slept deeply. The next morning my sister finally called. Her voice was tight, controlled, like she was choosing each word for maximum effect. She said she didn't understand how I could do this. She said I was being selfish. She said our parents were terrified. She said this wasn't the time to make a point. I listened until she finished. Then I told her I wasn't making a point. I was honoring a boundary they'd already defined for me. Always last had come from them, not me. I told her I wasn't withdrawing love. I was withdrawing access to my money. She went quiet. When she spoke again it was different, uncertain. She asked what they were supposed to do now. That question lingered after the call ended. I sat by the window and watched a delivery truck double park, watched a stranger jog past in a bright jacket, watched life continue without consulting me. I felt a small, steady certainty settle in my chest. They were about to learn something they'd never practiced before. How to solve a crisis without assuming I would absorb it. And that realization, slow, dawning, unavoidable, was what would stun them most. The solution came without me. That was the part no one had planned for. A week after the emergency first broke open, the calls slowed. Not because the situation had resolved neatly, but because something had shifted. My parents stopped asking when I would help and started asking how else things could be done. Insurance was reviewed. Assets were discussed. My sister's smile, so confident in the living room weeks earlier, didn't appear in any messages now. I heard later through my mother that they'd sold something. That my sister's family had taken out a loan they'd always said wasn't possible. That priorities had rearranged themselves quickly once my money was no longer the default answer. My mother's voice sounded different when she told me. Quieter. Less certain. She said she hadn't realized how much I'd been carrying until it wasn't there anymore. She said she wished they'd handled things differently. She didn't apologize. She named the absence instead. That was as close as she knew how to get. I listened without interrupting. I didn't rush to reassure her. I didn't step back into the old role. Awareness, once it arrives, changes the air. Later that evening my father called. He didn't lecture. He didn't explain. He said simply that they'd managed. He said it had been difficult. He said thank you for the help I had offered, the calls I'd made, the information I'd shared. Not for money. For presence measured on my terms. That mattered more than he probably understood. I sat at my kitchen table afterward, the room lit by a single lamp, the smell of clean wood and cooling dinner still in the air. I thought about the sentence that started it all. Always last. About how clearly it had been spoken and how honestly it had finally been answered. I hadn't punished anyone. I hadn't vanished. I'd stayed visible without being available for extraction. If you've ever been the one expected to rescue everyone else, you know how quickly love gets confused with access. Some families don't mean to take you for granted. They just never practice stopping. My plans went ahead. The class. The rip. The quiet, satisfying experience of choosing something because it was mine. Nothing dramatic happened. And that somehow felt like the biggest victory. I still speak to my parents. I still see my sister occasionally across rooms where conversations are more careful now. The order hasn't been rewritten completely. But it's been interrupted. And interruptions are where change begins. I didn't move up the list. I stepped off it. I stopped being the backup.